Setting boundaries can feel hard, I know, but the real emotional toll comes after you set them. It's the guilt, it's the anxiety, it's the overthinking and feeling like you have to manage the other person's feelings and emotions, even when you know you've done the right thing. If you're new here, I am Chris O, the host of PS Yourself podcast. And if you're a returning listener, thank you for joining me again. This is part 6 of the Living by Your Standards series, where we discuss the foundational principles and practices that help you raise, set, and live by your personal standards, including what it actually takes to live in full alignment with them, especially when life happens and it's not always easy. And in this specific episode, we're looking at what often comes after you set the boundary. And it's the part that is not really talked about in the space at all and online where people are talking about setting boundaries. It's the emotional experience of holding that boundary. And I want to first start off with sharing a personal example that I believe many of you will resonate with. And it really sets the stage for the purpose of this episode. So I have a friend, someone who I was very close to at one time, who's been there for me in many, many ways in the past, and I still really care about them. But I started to notice a repeating pattern in our dynamic that became emotionally exhausting on my end. Anytime I would share something really vulnerable, or I was the one in a vulnerable state, especially during a very difficult period or season, the conversation would suddenly shift back towards managing their emotions or their interpretations. Instead of being met with simply support, or even more importantly, real deep empathy, when I was in the vulnerable state, I found myself in a familiar, repeating dynamic of having to carefully navigate and soothe their emotional landscape. And while this wasn't malicious on their end because they're a good person, it started to become emotionally taxing, especially again, when I was the person in the vulnerable state or the one in need. So I chose to set a very clear boundary with this person, not to end the friendship, but to redefine how I invested in it. And I made it clear that I no longer wanted to engage in these types of emotionally taxing conversations where both of us fell into this repeating pattern of over-explaining, defensiveness, misinterpreting each other's perspectives. But here's where most people, again, don't talk about enough about as it relates to setting boundaries in the space online where there's lots of content about setting boundaries, and even that step is difficult too. But even after setting the boundary, for me, my nervous system would still activate anytime I saw this person's name pop up on my phone. And I know it wasn't guilt because I was very clear about my choice that came from discernment, but it was this feeling of anxiousness, this uncomfortable anticipation of having to possibly manage another emotionally loaded exchange. And even drafting my boundary message felt like an exhausting exercise. Carefully choosing my words to avoid them misinterpreting them, my intention as blaming or attacking. And I wasn't trying to make them feel bad because, again, I still care about them. But even managing how to express that boundary became another emotional task. And every new message afterwards felt like another item on my emotional to-do list. Does any of this resonate with you? If so, please drop them in the comments below. For it felt like something I had to gear up for, manage, and get through, which didn't feel like an authentic space of just genuine connection with a friend or ease. And I believe this is what real boundaries often looks like for emotionally intelligent women. It's not a dramatic exit or a big dramatic event, but backing away from emotional dynamics that start to really drain you over time. Learning how to hold that boundary without having to shame yourself, feel guilty, rumination, or feel nervous system overwhelmed. Let me tell you this, emotional activation is not failure. It's simply information. I really want to double tap here because so often we hear online and social media the language of I'm triggered or they triggered me. And while activation, yes, can feel very uncomfortable, I want to challenge that framing because activation doesn't mean something is actually wrong. It's really neutral. It's simply our nervous system giving us real-time feedback about how our body is responding to what is happening in that interaction, in that moment. And the common narrative around being triggered often assumes activation equals dysregulation equals failure. That activation equals it's another person's fault, so they triggered me, which is why you hear they triggered me. Activation equals something to avoid or fix immediately. But again, activation isn't something we need to fear or pathologize, which is just, I feel like we hear so often nowadays in social media and online. But instead, learning to observe your activation, I think, allows you to stop the self-judgment for feeling activated. Again, which is just your nervous system giving you information. Separate the activation from shame or self-doubt. Build this nervous system literacy so that you're not constantly reacting and trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings, but instead learning to sit with them, read them, understand them, and respond to them with clarity from discernment. So for example, when I notice myself feeling anxious or emotionally tense, this is real, as soon as I saw this person's name pop up on my phone, before the conversation even started and as it continued, I saw that that was my nervous system signaling that this dynamic is going to be emotionally expensive for you, Chris. And I believe in a really healthy relationship dynamic, regardless of who you're in the relationship with. Even when conversations are vulnerable, challenging, and uncomfortable, there's often a sense of co-regulation happening between the two people. The other person helps to calm and ground your system through true empathy, attunement, understanding, and holding space for you when you are the vulnerable one in need. And you don't feel like you're carrying the need to manage their emotions and dynamics when you are the vulnerable one in need. But in dynamics where you're consistently finding yourself managing how they receive your words, interpret your words, how they interpret your intentions, or how they emotionally respond, that's when your nervous system starts to anticipate emotional labor, even before the interaction begins and continues to stay activated throughout. That's what becomes so draining over time. So now I want to help you recognize some of the ways this emotional labor starts to slowly show up, because often it doesn't feel like this huge dramatic red flag. It's actually more subtle. And they can add up if you don't recognize it. Number one, emotional prepping. You catch yourself rehearsing conversations in your head days before you even speak to this person. Number two, emotional to-do list. As I explained in my personal example, an interaction that feels like a task you have to gear up for, that you have to prepare for, rather than just a natural, easy connection with someone. That's a sign. Number three, persistent activation. Just thinking about the future conversation with the person stirs anxiety or tension. Number four, emotional over-responsibility. You feel responsible for managing how they will receive your boundaries. And number five, empathy, exhaustion. You give compassion, but you rarely feel safe, seen, or supported in return when you are the one that is vulnerable and in need. And six, emotional conflict and self-judgment. You feel guilty or afraid you're being harsh or mean or selfish. But protecting your emotional peace is not unkind. Boundaries don't make you mean. Boundaries are supposed to make relationships sustainable. They're supposed to be helpful for relationships. So finally, I want to remind you that we need to normalize this nervous system data. Remind yourself that activation is not failure. It's just feedback. Tell yourself, my body is giving me information about my emotional capacity right now. to it's emotional capacity check-in. Pause and ask yourself one of these questions to really check in with your emotional capacity. Do I have the emotional capacity for this conversation right now with this person? Or am I trying to prevent discomfort or protect my peace? Is this dynamic respecting mutual emotional safety? And 3, pre-validate your boundaries. Affirm to yourself that it's okay to honor my energy. Their feelings about my boundary is not my responsibility to manage. 4, this is important, post boundary interaction reset. So it's not just set the boundary and forget it. After the interaction, it is important to reset your nervous system. I mean, this is the whole topic of this episode has been about the feelings, the emotional experiences that we feel after setting the boundary. So you can try things like breath work, movement, being in nature. What really works for me to down-regulate my nervous system and get back to the place of ease and peace again is to take a nice long meditative walk without any digital distraction, including any earphones in for music or podcasts. And so I want to end with this, that every time you honor your capacity, your emotional capacity, and hold space for your own peace, you are reinforcing your personal standards and living by them. And that's where true emotional alignment lives. So if this episode resonated with you, I would like to first of all thank you and invite you to continue exploring more about these topics inside my Living by Your Standards series in this podcast, where we go deeper into the emotional shifts and practices that help you fully align with your standards, how you can start to set them, raise them, and live by them. And I will link to the series below in this video description so you can continue learning. And if you want to go deeper, even deeper, I'm so excited to finally share with you that I've created a free self-reflection worksheet to help you with the very first and most important, in my opinion, step in this work. It is to make the clear distinction between standards and expectation. This is where many of us get stuck without realizing. And I know because I was there for many, many, many years. We think we're holding standards, high standards, but we're really operating and living by expectations we set on others and on ourselves, which always leads to frustration and disappointment. And when you start to shift into true standards, that's where you create the foundation for full alignment and confidence. And you can download the free standards versus expectations self-reflection worksheet that I created. I really poured a lot into it. It's actually all the tools and frameworks that helped me finally arrive to a place of living by your standards and letting go of these expectations on other people, especially the people that I care about the most, and on myself, to truly feel self-assured and confident to live by my personal standards. And I know that it'll be really valuable to you. It's completely free. It was supposed to be just a quick 2 to 3 page worksheet, but it turned out to be 10 plus pages because I just really wanted to pour as much value into it, and it's completely free. So I'll drop the link in the video description below as well so you can have access to that. And thank you again. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. As always, if you're a returning listener, and for all the new listeners, thank you. I hope this provided value for you as well so that you can continue to come back. And please help to spread the word and share this with one other person that you think will gain value as well. Thank you. I hope to see you again next time.